Hey everybody, before we start the show, I wanted to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by the good folks at Elderwood Academy. Elderwood Academy are artisans who craft amazing gaming products, including dice towers, dice trays, dice boxes, deck boxes, dice, and more. All the products are crafted to look like spell books, scroll cases, codices, and other awesome fantasy gear we love. So, what I need you to do right now is head on to elderwoodacademy.com/don't split. That's elderwoodacademy.com/don't split and see all of these beautiful products. Pick something out for yourself because you deserve it, bub. You deserve it. If I was going to pick something, I would pick the Dice Catapult Kit if I were you. These things can launch D20s at your friends. Very, very fun and disturb your game, which is always good. Of course, if you don't want that, I do recommend checking out their hex chests. Oh, wow. These are for carrying your dice around in. They're beautiful. They're small. They're portable. They're compact. They're customizable. Go check it out. elderwoodacademy.com/don't split. That's elderwoodacademy.com/don't split. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcasso. Today on the show, I am chatting with the one and only Daniel Kwan. Daniel is an amazing game designer, a podcaster, an all-around really smart, intelligent, kind human who is a big, big part of the role-playing game community. We're going to get into all of the stuff he does right now. Okay, everybody, now I'm here with one of the best people in the RPG industry, in the world, I dare say. Daniel, for people who don't know, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Hi, I'm Daniel Kwan. I'm a designer and podcaster and writer. I do many, many things. I've been called an educator and some other things. In the world of tabletop role-playing games, I'm a freelance writer. I own a company called Dundas West Games. I'm currently in the middle of finishing up my first big RPG. It's a historical game called Ross Rifles about the First World War. I co-run an organization called Level Up Gaming. We help adults with autism and other disabilities develop their social skills through D&D and other tabletop games. I'm also a freelancer for Wizards, and I co-host a podcast called Asians Represent, and we talk about Asian themes and cultures and issues in gaming, as well as produce our own content like Dungeons into Asians, which is our D&D actual play. And I think that's all I do in RPGs.
I know, it's crazy because you also have a life outside of RPGs, and that is an impressive list. I am super, super excited to have you on because you do so many amazing things in the world of role-playing games, and I am excited to hear about Daniel Kwan and to bring your perspective to the world, because I think you've got a lot of great ideas that you are bringing to role-playing games. And before we get to that, I would love for you to just take me all the way back to the first time you played a tabletop role-playing game. What were you playing? What was the experience like? Lay it out for me.
Oh my God. I remember it very vividly, actually. Because it leads into one of my first jobs in role-playing games.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This was over 2 decades ago at the Royal Ontario Museum here in Toronto. They used to run, and they still do, run a Dungeons & Dragons program at the museum where kids between the ages of 10 to 14 could go and play D&D in the museum's collections all day.
Wow.
But yeah, and so long story short, I ended up teaching that program for 8 years and being involved with it as a volunteer, as a student for a good chunk of my life. But yeah, that's where I got my first start. We were playing 3rd edition D&D. I remember sitting at the top of the escalators in the old China gallery with my brother, rolling up my first character. It was as an elf fighter.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
is an elf fighter named Aramel.
Yeah, you really do remember it vividly. This is awesome.
Yeah, very vividly. It was quite the experience. My brother doesn't hasn't played an RPG in a very, very long time, but for me it hooked me.
Nice, nice. That is great. That is great. So typically my question after this is like, at what point do you make the jump to integrating RPGs into your professional career? But it sounds like from the moment you started playing, they were sort of part of what you were doing. They were linked to your work.
Yeah, they were linked to me forever. Forever.
So you mentioned that you are a designer. How did you start doing RPG design work?
So as a teacher at the museum, I was basically trying to find games that I could use in that educational context. I was using D&D, I was using Pathfinder, and I had found some other RPGs like The Warren and Night Witches. And this would have been 3 years ago. Remembrance Day was kind of coming up, and I was trying to plan ahead. And I thought, okay, there's no real good World War One RPG. Anything that existed at the time was all like Weird War One, which I have mixed feelings about. Are you familiar with like Weird War One?
Is that Cthulhu-y World War
Yeah, it's
One?
like Cthulhu, basically monsters in no man's land kind
Yeah,
of
it's
thing.
a Savage Worlds. Is that right?
Savage Worlds does is the big one,
Okay.
and
Okay.
I'm not a big fan because I think it kind of diminishes the experiences of the people there by saying, "Oh, everything that was horrible wasn't human; that was supernatural." But I thought, okay, you know what? I could probably write my own game, and I sat down with, at the time, two of my teaching assistants, Patrick and Daniel, and we were like, okay, let's just write something. And so we put together a quick start, and with that quick start, we basically said, okay, we have a game, and we ran World War One on Remembrance Day, so November 11th, for two of my classes in the same day. After taking them to go see some monuments, we walked all of them through the Battle of Passchendaele, and that was our first playtest. 50 people.
Wow, 50 people for a playtest, for your first
They were
playtest.
all teenagers.
Oh
Yeah,
my.
they were all teenagers.
Did you get overwhelming feedback for that, in the sense of like, I remember when I did my first playtest for something I had written, it was like for a group of friends, and I was like, ooh, this is shockingly mean. And then now I know, like, oh no, this is good, right? It's good to get these comments because it helps you make the thing better before you put it up for sale or show it to other people or that kind of thing. 50 people, particularly teenagers, who I certainly don't want to put in one large group of opinionated people who are not afraid to let you know what they think. But in my experience, many teenagers are like that. Was it overwhelming to get that feedback like that for the first time?
I mean, we kind of knew we knew that they were they were going to be a little mean, but
Sure.
but to be honest, they were actually really great about it. They were really chill about it. They gave us some solid feedback, and that feedback kind of drove us for the next year while we play tested it at cons. That was like our first stress test. You know, when they release the MMO and then the servers get overloaded on the first day and then you get all the negative reviews. We were like, let's just do that right at the beginning. We kind of took it all in stride. They were really cool about it because I think they realized that we were trying to make it a part of the lesson to teach them about the war, and they just kind of got hooked. And then from there, I just kind of started doing more design work. I kind of started doing more social media, and people started to, hire me for their projects.
That's cool. I mean, it is great. And you are an extremely intelligent and kind and thoughtful and creative individual. So it is no surprise that people want to work with you. Let's talk a little bit about Asians Represent, because I think that's where you're also bringing some of your design skills to bear, as well as your experience with Asian culture. So talk to me a little bit about Asians Represent. For people who don't know, what is it? And what do you talk about on the podcast, and what's the actual play like?
Yeah, oh my God, Asians Represent. Asians Represent is, I can't believe it's been almost 2 years since we started Asians Represent. But Asians Represent is a podcast that I started with my friend Agatha Chang. We're on the One Shot Network. And we started off as a discussion-based show where we would talk about issues that Asians faced in the TTRPG space, but also in how our cultures are depicted in RPGs. So we started off the first episode with like the biggest elephant in the room, and that was Oriental Adventures.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we kind of just completely dissected the two Oriental Adventures books, the AD&D one and the third edition reprint, and just moved from there. We started interviewing guests, and it started with us like kind of like being really mean to a lot of the books of the 80s.
They deserve it. They deserve it.
They deserve it. Started being really mean to that, but then also trying to uplift our community. So while we were trying to identify problematic products out there and explain why they weren't the greatest, for every negative thing we would say about a deserving product, we would try to say a positive thing about a deserving creator. And so we would interview somebody with every episode and uplift their work. We did a whole thing where we really tried to expose a lot of North American fans to the Southeast Asian RPG community and all of their work and all of their amazing creators. And Asians Represent expanded into this show about Asian designers. That's what, it kind of turned into. And then, as, your show's popularity grows, sort of the things our audience wanted. And we started off with one episode a month. We went to 2 episodes a month of this interview-based show. And then people started asking for actual play. And so we thought, okay, why not? We did a superhero show for 4 episodes. And then I thought it would be great to do a D&D show. And this was after D&D Live 2019. I got invited to go there to perform, and it was wonderful. But then I saw that there were so very few Asians doing D&D stuff and actually handling Asian cultures in D&D. And I thought that it would have been irresponsible for us not to do that. And so we started a D&D show called Dungeons and Asians. And like everything we do on Asians Represent, it's got an all Asian cast and takes place in an Asian world. And it's kind of the pinnacle of my RPG career, because not only does it get to draw on my history of podcasting, because I started podcasting before Asians Represent, but it wasn't all gaming. But it also, takes on my academic background and my experiences as an archaeologist. So I kind of get to use that all in one.
That's
that
cool.
show.
That's really cool. And one of the things that I think is great is you design a lot of the character options for the podcast, right? You're not necessarily just pulling from Wizards of the Coast. You have your own ideas and are creating your own stuff, which is amazing.
Yeah, none of the classes where our PCs are using are from any of the books. Yeah, we found that none of them really fit our theme.
Sure. Well, and so some might ask, right? Like, well, what about the monk? I think is probably the first thing. And I've heard you answer this before on other podcasts. You were on Dragon Talk, and I encourage everybody to go listen to that interview because it was a great interview. I think one of the things that you are doing is exposing somebody like me who doesn't have a vast knowledge of Asian culture. And I also think, D&D tends to put Asian culture into like this monolithic, all things that are Asian are X kind of culture, which is also not true. Like there are many cultures within Asian culture. It's just been really cool to hear about the different character options. And I'm wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about some of the ones that you have on the show, just because they're awesome.
Yeah, you know what? I'll drop you some exclusives that we haven't even talked about on our podcast.
Nice.
Yeah, here this is the first time I'll talk about some of them. So Agatha's character, Dongfang, is a sky soldier. So sky soldiers are essentially demigods. They are Agatha's character is a god who has been banished from the Sky Court, which is heaven. So the Sky Soldier is kind of akin to the Paladin, and that's what we had Agatha playing at first. But we found that some of the things that Agatha wanted to do just didn't fit in, especially with this memory loss. And so the Sky Soldier has something called reincarnation, where they exist as an entity with dual natures, their past and present. and the Sky Soldier is all about redemption. And so they have a past life that they have to work against. So Agatha's character's past life is the wayward sort of deity. And so they have to contrast that with a life of duty.
Whoa.
And so they have different abilities. So we have like wayward and coward and warlord. And obviously warlord is balanced with atonement, and coward is balanced with bravery. And when you pick a past life, every couple levels, you get new abilities that go with that particular reincarnation. You also get like knowledge that that comes with your past life. We call it awakened knowledge, and you get a spiritual companion, which is an animal companion.
Right. Oh, that's badass. I love that.
Since animal companions figure pretty heavily in Chinese folk tales.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
So we redid the monk, and we got rid of the fighter, and we just called it the martial artist. The big thing that I really dislike about the monk in 5th edition is that it assumes that anybody who fights with their limbs is inherently spiritual. And then that just plays on the stereotype that all Asians are spiritual.
Right.
So we were like, no, out with that. And we were like, out with the fighter, because I don't get why the monk in most editions of D&D is so limited in the number of weapons they could use. Because if you look at any kung fu movie or any, Chinese action movie, the martial artist could use anything.
Right. Yeah, that is definitely true.
Yeah. So so we were like, okay, let's do the martial artist, because that's relatable for people, but also something that we could work with. It gives us some freedom. And with our martial artist, we kind of gave it 2 paths. And this is something we're still playing with. Maybe there'll be 2 different classes. But the great thing about the show is that we're world building and designing as we play. So we have 2 styles. There's the soft style, the one that focuses on chi, the one that's kind of similar to what you understand the 5th or 3rd edition monk to be. It's got chi, except chi is more culturally relevant to China in this one. So they have the idea of healing, because healing isn't really in the D&D monk as it is. They're like, they're immune to disease and things like that. But chi and acupuncture and self-cultivating chi to heal yourself is something that's very important in Chinese martial arts. So that's our one monk. Our second one is called the Waijia, the hard style monk, who's an expert with weapons. The idea of the 18 arms, all the weapons. And so this is the kind of monk who can master forms. So one kind of form you could master could be all of the weapons. So you could go the route of the fighter. Or you could master, say, your body. And so they get this ability called Iron Body. And that's what Amar kind of went with. And so his character, Waleed, has basically hardened his body and is making it stronger so he can improve his spirit, his soul, his hands, like Iron Fist, except he's got iron palms. He has Iron Resolve, so his mental strength, and of course his iron skin.
Yes.
So think like, have you ever seen Kill Bill?
Yes.
So think of like Pai Mei's training, but into a class.
That's very cool. And I love the expansion of options too. There've been a lot of times where I have wanted to play some sort of unarmed warrior who isn't necessarily like inherently mystical in magic, right? And so having options like that, I think, are great for everybody. It's always fun to have more options, but this is also just like, I'm hearing you talk about it and I'm like, let's roll up characters right now.
Let's do it right
exactly.
now.
Exactly. Hey everyone, we're going to take a quick break and then back to the babble.
Leave behind the safety of the Humblewood and travel down the Tangrip coast to the Bay of Baluch, home to both the Kingdom of Den and the Serpent Domain. But neither hold the true power of the Bay, for that lies in the sea itself and the pirate lords that call her tides their own. The dread pirate Captain Bluebeak, Tiberius Fang, Kin the Bladeless, and Gabrielle LaFleur, the self-proclaimed pirate queen. each one vying for power over the very tides themselves. But do any of them really have what it takes to hold up the legacy of the briny bulldog? Tune in each week to find out if our little crew has what it takes to stand up to the pirates of the blood-soaked waters. Dark Fortunes is available every Monday on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. Set sail for high seas adventure.
Let's get back to the babble. When you sit down to design, I think, designing new classes is one of the hardest things to add to the game, right? I design a lot of GM options, I would call them, right? Monsters and adventures and things like that. And one of the reasons is, I like it. I love doing it. But the other is they're a little bit easier to throw out there because if you create a monster that's unbalanced, right? What do? You change its CR, maybe you adjust a couple abilities and you're good to go. And it doesn't necessarily break the game because that monster shows up for one adventure, maybe a couple times over the course of a campaign or something like that. Whereas a class you're playing with every single time you sit down, and there's 20 levels to design and all this kind of stuff. How do you approach class design when you sit down to do it?
Oh my God. Yeah. For us, it's exactly that. It's the reason why we haven't put them out yet. We started with a concept. We were like, okay, how do we want this class to play out narratively? Because I think the narrative is more important. How does it play out narratively? What is this class? Like the third class that we have that Steve's playing as Ning is the Yoxia, and that's kind of the knight errant, the soldier of fortune, the adventuring knight. It's like, well, how do we want this to play out? What do we want this to look like? And how can it be within theme, right? Because that's really important. The whole reason we were redoing all these classes to make sure that they were sensitive to Asian cultures. And so we thought, okay, what do we want it to do? What's been done? And what can we do better? So for us, it was like, okay, well, the Yoxia is a knight errant. That's kind of like every hero in a kung fu movie. If you've watched literally like Hero with Jet Li.
Yes.
That's the character. The wandering vagabond who's been carrying around a sword wrapped up in cloth for most of the movie. And at the climax, they throw it off their sword and they've got this beautiful sword. We wanted a character with a signature weapon. So we're like, okay, well, what if we combined what you get with, say, a fighter and a rogue? And we kind of looked at those abilities, saw what kind of carried over in the SRD, the 5e SRD, found that almost none of it was good to carry over. And then we were like, okay, then we proceed to making things from scratch. That's kind of been our process right now. And then, of course, testing them out with gameplay. We've tested a lot of them out with our more narrative style gameplay. We've had episodes where we don't roll any dice, but now I'm kind of leading our group into, okay, we're going to be rolling a lot of dice. Let's test out these characters.
Nice. That is very cool. Play tests are always very, very exciting. And it takes a long time if you want to make a class that can truly, stand up with the rest and not be too powerful or too light or too weird or whatever it is, right? There's all these different levers. And often with a class, sometimes you pull one and everything else then is out of whack.
Yeah, that's the reason why we've kind of stayed clear of magic. None of the player characters in Dungeons & Asians have magical abilities, or at least overtly magical abilities, just because magic in Asia is very different than what it's like in Europe or how we see it in European fantasy. It's like you cast a spell and it does a thing. But in Asia, there is really no such thing as arcane magic. It's all very much divine magic. So how does that work in D&D? And so we have I've been working on an idea called the diviner. And it's somebody who uses the magic of their ancestors. It's closest to the 5th edition warlock. But in a lot of early Chinese magic and in archaeology, people gained power from their connection to their ancestors. Like it's almost like my friends are better than your friends. Let me just roll up with my homies, except my homies are like all spirits.
Uh-huh. That is awesome. That's badass. I really want to play something that rolls up with like a bunch of spirits ready to kick some butt is just super fun. And I love the story first approach that you're taking with all of this of like the, what can I create that hasn't been created yet that is also interesting and going to be fun to play. I am looking forward to seeing some of these options hit the shelves so that other people can experience them. Myself, selfishly hoping to experience some of them for sure.
I mean, I just want to get the stuff out there. It's been we're taking it slow. I'm of the mindset to actually I want to make sure that we can put out, or at least go to say Kickstarter or whatever, with a semi-finished product rather than, take people's money and then like wait 3 years. I'd rather wait 3 years and then take people's money.
Yeah, exactly. And you'll have something good. And the other thing is, the legend of Asians Represent and Daniel Kwan is growing in that time. So hopefully, when it does hit Kickstarter or wherever you choose to sell or crowdfund, it will be even more massive because more people will sort of know about you to get a peek behind the marketing curtain here.
Yeah. Set expectations real high.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So you'll make $250,000.
Oh, bless.
It's really very cool though. And so in addition to your design work and your podcasting work, we have to talk about Level Up Gaming, because this is just such a cool way that you are using gaming as a tool to help other people. Can you talk about sort of the genesis of the idea and how it works?
Yeah, I've told this story so many times, and every single time I'm not saying I don't want to say it. I'm just saying that every single time I tell the story, I get emotional because recounting this story, I feel those emotions I felt every single time. So yeah, Level Up Gaming is like I said earlier, an organization that I started here with two of my friends, Kelsey McIver and Christian Blake. Kelsey's all three of us were actually teachers at the ROM, and I introduced both of them to D&D through the class I was teaching there. And we became quick friends. We were all just like super into fantasy. Kelsey is a spec ed teacher, and Christian at the time was studying to be an occupational therapist. He has since become an actual occupational therapist. But the three of us started it 2016, and we called it Roleplay TO. We had to change it to Level Up Gaming because there was another roleplay. So yeah, we started off with a small group of 5 people, all over the age of 18. And we kind of have expanded, and now we run, oh God, I think this year we're set to run at least 8 programs compared to the 1 a year we were running 8 programs. We have volunteers. We just hired another person to be on our team, who's also an occupational therapist who plays D&D. But when we first started, it was just this idea. In my D&D program at the museum, when I was teaching, I was getting a lot of kids who were on the spectrum. They would often have, one-on-one assistants who would, sit and help them out. But it all started with this one kid. And I remember the first day, his mom, who I'm still in touch with them actually, which is crazy. His mom first came up to me and was like, "Hey, this is my son. He went off to, watch the morning movies while all the other kids were being signed in." And she pulled me aside and was like, "Hey, he has Asperger's, and we've tried different camps before, and not all have worked out. Here's my number. If it doesn't work out, call me and I'll come pick him up right away." I was like kind of taken aback because I hadn't had a parent basically tell me, "Hey, if my kid doesn't work out, I'll come pull them from your program. I won't give you a chance." And I said, no, it'll be fine. And, we had some difficulties, but I was like, no, I'm not going to call his mom. We had some difficulties, and he eventually fell in love with D&D. It took 2 weeks, every day for 8 hours in my class. It took 2 weeks, and he fell in love with the world of D&D and this campaign setting that I was writing with my students, We had like a campaign that lasted like 5 years. He fell in love with D&D, and I got to see him evolve as like a person. He started writing and reading, and he started bringing notes for the campaign setting. He's like, okay, these are my notes on the orcs, Daniel. They're like, okay, well, that's canon now. That's what orcs are like. And he started playing different characters. He started off, I remember his first one was the half-orc barbarian, and he just wanted to kill things. And then he started playing more thoughtful characters. He started playing bards and clerics, and it was just beautiful. And, I just treated him like I did every other kid. And there was nothing special to it. Oh, people always ask me if there's something special. I was like, no, it's just honestly being a good GM, sitting down, attuning to the kid like you would a magic item in 5th edition, and finding out what they want and creating an experience out of that, be it the educational experience, but also the in-game experience. And he was my student for 4 years, and I kind of used him as a model on how I would help out other kids with autism who would enter the program. And I developed a reputation for that at the museum. At the same time as I was teaching there, I was working as an archaeologist for the University of Toronto. I dug in like Jordan, Greece, China. And I was flying out of JFK to go to Athens to spend a month living in, this is the craziest thing, living in like this like British mansion at the heart of Athens, studying pottery. It was weird. But I was in the airport, and I got an email from his mom. And she emailed me, and she's like, hey, this is 4 years after he started. He's like, hey, I'm going to pull my son from the last 2 sessions. I had to have a substitute cover me. Last 2 sessions. And he doesn't feel like he wants to be in your class anymore. And this is me reading it. And I was like, oh my God, what did I do wrong? And she was like, he doesn't feel like he wants to be in your class anymore because he wants to work for you now. He doesn't want to be a student anymore. He wants to work for you. And as I was reading this, I'm in JFK and I'm bawling my eyes out. I'm the ugliest crier. The ugliest crier. And I'm bawling my eyes out in the airport. And I emailed her back, and I was like, absolutely. When I'm back from Greece, here's my like phone number. I will write him a reference letter, and he will work for me. I went to Greece, and this whole time I was thinking about it. This month I was in Greece, and when I came back, I like put things into motion, and he ended up volunteering for me and working for me for a year. And it was during this time that I started talking to Kelsey and Christian. I was like, oh my God, this happened. At the same time, I've had other kids who have come who have had violent histories and have been violent and have just stopped because of D&D and have made friends and have transitioned to regular schools. And we were like, okay, well, we got to do something. Like, we found something crazy here. But we decided that we would do it for people over the age of 18. Because when you turn 18, your access to and the availability of programming for you is greatly diminished. There's almost nothing. And so you're like, oh, how do we help people who are adults? And so we decided that Level Up Gaming would be for adults. And that's kind of what we've gone with for now. And I was in touch with this student. He's 19 now. And he's at a university now, and he's self-published 2 books. And he's studying to be a lawyer. It's the craziest thing.
I mean, and that is amazing. And like, certainly, right, the power of role-playing games is an important part of this story. But I think also important is the power of Daniel. The fact that you were willing to take on the challenge and give time to this pursuit and help this young man and lots of other people out. It really shows that when role-playing games are in the right hands, what a difference it can make. You should be, and I think you are, right? You should be very proud of the work that you've done, and so should this young man should be very proud of the work that he has done and the fun that you have had together, right? Like the fact that,
oh my God, yeah,
you got to play D&D while you were doing it is amazing. That's a dream come true.
Over the course of my teaching career, I think I did the math. And if I average everything out, because most students stayed with me for 4 years, I've taught at least I'll say like conservatively, I think I've taught at least 500 teenagers how to play D&D.
Wow. Wow. Wizards of the Coast should write you a check. That is huge.
I know, right? Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen so many of them, kind of grow up to continue playing D&D, to pursue careers where playing D&D has really helped them out. Several of my students, for some reason, have decided to go become lawyers, and I just can't wait for them to use their RPG skills in the courtroom.
Oh, wow. That is, I mean, that's an amazing thing. There's a lot of careers I think of that, like, how do role-playing games prepare us? Lawyer has not come up in my brain until now, but it makes perfect sense. Lawyers write a lot, and a lot of RPG, whether you're on the player side or the GM side, writing is part of that. Certainly weaving a narrative, telling a good story is part of that. You should be making a pre-law course out of D&D, Dan.
Let's just sit down and play D&D.
Well,
and then you make it work for yourself.
Exactly. You are doing all of these great and cool things in the community. How has it been these last several years, sort of being on this ride, becoming more and more involved in the RPG community, more and more known in the RPG community for the work that you're doing?
It's pretty cool. Pretty cool. It's still weird when people want to take a picture with me or be like, "Oh my God, you responded to my tweet." It still really weirds me out. It was really weird when I went to D&D Live and people recognized me just like out on the streets in LA. I was like, I'm not even at the event. How do you know it's me? I'm just an Asian guy. I didn't even have colored hair back then. But no, it's been crazy. And my big thing is like, I just want to bring all my friends up with me, try to help them on that. I mean, with Asians Represent, it's like every time I get an offer from a company to write something, my question to them is always like, can I bring a friend? That's always my question to the publisher. It's like, can I bring a friend? And I ask every single one, like, can I bring a friend? Because I have a buddy here who's amazing, doesn't have like the credits that I do, but they're just as talented. Can I collaborate with them? And I will split the paycheck 50-50 with them. That's actually for the past year, that's been my go-to. It's like, hey, can I bring a friend? Because I mean, I didn't do this alone. I did this with all these other people around me. And so I got to bring them up with me.
Wow. You have such a good heart, my friend. It means a lot to those people, but it also means a lot to the community that you are helping other people up as well, as you make your way up the ladder, which is just really cool. For people who are out there, who are like thinking about getting their start in game design or in podcasting, or what advice would you have for them about just getting into the RPG community?
Oh, just start doing it. Just start making. Big one for podcasting is like I started podcasting in 2015, long before Asians Represent even existed or was a thought. I started podcasting. I had a podcast originally called the Really Effing Cool Podcast. Yeah, yeah.
It's great because it's also like it's totally a podcast name that would have been popular like 5 to 10 years ago, right?
Yep.
Like there were all these podcasts that just had weird names like that. That's great.
It was called the Really Effing Cool Podcast, and I made 10 episodes before I rebranded. And I rebranded because my students heard that I was podcasting and they were like, "What's your podcast called?" And I was like, damn. So I was like, okay, this is probably not the best marketing idea. So based on my current fan base, so I which consisted of teenagers who I was teaching. So I rebranded it to something called Curiosity and Focus. It's still out there. You could find it on Spotify, iTunes, and Stitcher. It was just a podcast where I interviewed people who I thought were really effing cool. It was like computer hackers. Some of them were game designers. I interviewed Simu Liu from Kim's Convenience, who's now Shang-Chi. I got to interview a former UFC fighter, and I just got to meet some really cool people. And I started this podcast to answer a question, like without any experience editing audio or recording audio. I just did it. I was like, okay, I have a microphone. I'm going to sit down in a room. Echoey is good, right? And then I'll just have a conversation. And I think people were just drawn to it because of the conversation, and the quality eventually improved. And so when people want to start podcasting, just put your episodes out there. Just get started. If you want to design something, just start writing. But at the same time, think about who you're portraying. And that's a big one in RPGs. We see a lot of people who are like obsessed with Japan, but they're not Japanese. Or they're like, I spent my summer abroad in Tokyo. I'm going to put out a game about samurai. That's when I'll say, hey, you can create whatever you want to create. But if you're going to put something out there because you love it or you're inspired by something that you're passionate about, make sure you represent it well. That's a big one. I'm not here to gatekeep, and I don't think the Asian community should be, but the Asian community is here making sure that we're being properly represented, especially at this time. I think a lot of people are like, oh, Daniel is really sensitive about Asian TTRPG products. I'm sensitive about how Asians look, because this is kind of a really scary time to be Asian, to be honest. With your president calling this issue we have the Chinese virus.
Yeah, what a racist a-hole that guy is.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like, create whatever you want to create, but make sure you don't harm anybody along the way. So for budding designers, it's like, just put your stuff out there. But do your research. And that's all I really say.
Yeah. And I honestly, I was impressed. Even just this week, I've seen you interact with people online, and you are able to call people out, but also like educate them and at the same time, which is, not your responsibility to do. But I've seen you be able to say to people, hey, this is bad. And, provided the creator doesn't become a defensive a-hole, like, you can go back and forth and actually get through to them. It is fascinating to watch you have a level of kindness and empathy that I think is uncommon in humans. I think you have this very approachable persona, and I really, like, my fingers are crossed that someday you and I get to work together on something, just because I think everything you do is so cool.
I mean, let's just make it happen. I mean,
yeah.
We're already going to do something for anything but D&D.
Right. Exactly. For people who don't know, we've got a couple minutes left here. What is Anything But D&D?
Oh, it's a show that I started on my Patreon. I was kind of, as I got more popular and as I've met more awesome people, I've met a lot of awesome people who aren't Asian, but all of the media that I produce is about Asian people. I'm like, oh, but I have all these really dope friends that I want to interview, that I want to, sit down and, talk to and learn from. But if I'm sitting and talking and learning from someone, I want to make sure that other people can also learn.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to be able to record it and put it out there. But if they're not Asian, I don't have a platform for that. So I was basically, oh man, I need to create something new. Oh no. And so I was talking to my buddy, Joe DeSimone, and I was like, hey, I want to do an interview show. I want to talk about the OSR with you.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, oh, awesome. He's like, how long is the first episode going to be? He's like, I got 4 hours of content ready. And I was like, no, 40 minutes. And he's like, okay, well, he basically was like, I'll do it on the condition that you have me on for at least 10 episodes. And I said, A-okay. And so halfway through the recording, I was like, hey, let's just call this Anything But D&D, where we talk about TTRPG stuff, but not D&D. So if you ever wanted to, learn about other, like the history of the tabletop role-playing game genre, if you want to know about the OSR, if it's this like scary community that from a lot of the things you've seen online, I'm trying to create a series that people can kind of learn from. I think the next episode we're doing is on different magic systems and the interesting magic systems that lie outside of D&D. Because to be honest, D&D magic is kind of boring.
Yep. Agreed. That is that's really cool and is a great idea for a show. Starting with the OSR is a really great way to go, because we've done a couple episodes about the OSR on this show, and it is like most things, so much deeper.
Yeah. I mean, after the first episode, I ended up buying a whole bunch of books. It wasn't it wasn't good for me. And one of them just arrived today. I just bought the Trilemma Adventures Compendium.
Oh, okay.
Which
yeah.
They're all like 1 to 2 page adventures, and it's beautifully laid out. So it's also an excuse for me to find new books to buy.
That's awesome. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining me on Tabletop Babble today. For people who want to find you on the internet, where should they go and what should they do?
Yeah, you could just find me on Twitter at Daniel H. Kwan. That's Daniel H. KWAN. That's my social handle on pretty much everything. So my Instagram, my website is danielhkwan.com. My Patreon for things weird is patreon.com/Daniel H. Kwan. I put like one-page RPGs there. That's where I put all the episodes of Anything But D&D. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Find me on my social media, and then you'll see everything else I do. Asians Represent is also, you can find it through my pages. That's AZNS Represent on pretty much everything as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Yeah, branding. Very important. Very important. Thanks for joining me today on Tabletop Babble. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm glad we made this happen.
What a great interview that was with Mr. Daniel Kwan. Thank you so much for coming on the show. You know, people, you can support Tabletop Babble by heading on over to patreon.com/Intricasso. That's patreon.com/Intricasso, where you can support me and everything that I am doing with Tabletop Babble, with World Builder Blog, and more. If you're already giving, thank you so much. I cannot tell you how you are the person who is helping make this show come off the ground. You're a producer. Legit. Too legit to quit. And hey, maybe you can't help out financially. Maybe you already are. Maybe you just want to do something for the show. Give us 30 seconds of your time. Head on over to Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts right now, you can do it through the app. It's so easy. And if you leave us 5 stars and you leave us a words in your review, guess what? I'll read it out loud. You can make me say anything that you want. Anything. Anything. That's crazy. Your words, my mouth. Imagine it. Imagine it. And so I have a review right here from our good friend, Crazed Artist, who left a review entitled, "Great Show, Subscribe Now." This reads, "I'm a busy DM and I only have so many hours to listen to podcasts, but I make sure I catch every episode of your show's great interviews and discussions. Thank you so much, Jen/Pixelscapes." Listen, Jen is an amazing artist and has all kinds of awesome stuff. You should follow Jen on Twitter. Pixelscapes, spelled like it sounds, all one word. All right, people, you can find me on Twitter at James Intricasso and over at worldbuilderblog.com. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network that's edited by Nate Pausenga. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding DSPN with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget, RPGs are like sex.
Hey there, listeners, it's Ishan.
And Shane from the Total Party Thrill podcast.
Oh, another actual play show.
Nope, because no one wants to hear the two of us in character.
Well, which means it must be one of those interview shows.
Not at all. We talk about topics that help listeners create and play better RPGs.
Oh, right. It's a podcast for game masters and players where we discuss our campaigns in order to inspire yours.
Dude, that's literally been our tagline for 3 years.
I mean, it doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. How about Total Party Thrill? Get better game.
All right, look, the tagline doesn't matter as long as the content is good. Like episode 168 on mind control. Wait, Ishan, did you just force me to say it like that?
No, you're thinking of the episode on gaslighting.
Oh.
We also recap our Eberron and Warhammer 40k home games and review new RPGs and books.
And every episode, we build a 5th edition D&D character in the Character Creation Forge.
I'm partial to the Sexy Beast, a high charisma druid who's still the party face, even in animal form.
All right, I'm sold. Where can I find Total Party Thrill?
Well, right here on DSPN, or on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Stitcher.
Or check us out at www.totalpartythrill.com.